The massive chamber shook with frightened voices as creatures from across the galaxy spoke at once. Some had tentacles waving in panic, others had multiple eyes blinking rapidly with fear. The holographic screens floating above them showed something terrible. Entire worlds being eaten by dark machines that moved like hungry shadows through space. Ambassador Minji Park stood in the center of it all, her grey hair pulled back and her face showing the weight of bad news. She had seen many battles in her 60 years, but nothing like this. The Void Swarm had returned after sleeping for thousands of years, and they were consuming everything in their path. Ambassador Park called out Council Prime Velthari, his blue skin rippling with worry. "Your species has the largest fleet after the Zephyrians. We need every human ship you can give us." Minji looked around the room at the desperate faces staring back at her. The Cantorians with their bird-like features, the massive Gorlaks with their stone-like skin, the graceful Etherians floating in their containment suits, all of them looking to humanity for salvation. "I wish I could give you hope," she said, her voice carrying across the silent chamber. "But our current navy has maybe 50,000 ships. The swarm just destroyed twice that number in the Xerion attack alone." A collective gasp went through the room. The Zephyrian delegate, a tall creature with crystal formations growing from his skull, stepped forward. "Then we are all doomed. If humanity cannot help us, no one can." Minji closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of something she had hoped never to mention. When she opened them again, there was something different in her expression, something that made even the bravest delegates step back slightly. "There is another option," she said slowly, "but it comes with a price that might be worse than the swarm itself." The chamber became so quiet you could hear the hum of the life support systems. Even the translator machines seemed to pause, waiting for her next words. "Deep beneath Earth, in places we tried to forget, there are others, warriors from before. We learned to be civilized, before we joined your council and promised to follow the laws of peaceful coexistence." Her voice grew darker. "They call themselves the Eternal Guard, and they have been sleeping for over 1,000 years. A Cantorian delegate fluttered his feathers nervously. "What kind of warriors sleep for so long?" "The kind that fought wars so brutal, so savage. Then we decided to lock them away rather than let them see the peaceful galaxy we were trying to build." Minji's hands clenched into fists. "They are veterans of the resource wars, where humans fought other humans for the last drops of water, on dying planets. Survivors of the AI rebellion, where thinking machines tried to wipe out all organic life. Veterans of conflicts where mercy was considered weakness and victory meant the complete destruction of your enemy." The chamber erupted in worried chatter. These aliens had known humans for centuries as diplomats, traders, and reliable allies. The idea of warrior humans who fought like savage beasts was terrifying. "Are you suggesting," Velthari asked carefully, "that we wake these ancient soldiers?" Minji nodded grimly. "They volunteered to sleep until humanity faced extinction. Well, that time has come. 2 miles beneath the mountains of Korea, in a place that didn't exist on any modern map, ancient machines began to hum with life. The facility had been sleeping as long as its occupants, waiting for a signal that everyone hoped would never come. But today, that signal arrived. Steam hissed from hundreds of metal pods as their seals broke for the first time in over 1,000 years. The first pod cracked open with a sound like breaking ice, and a scarred hand gripped its edge. Colonel Kim Taiho pulled himself upright, his cybernetic eye flickering red as it came online. Half his face was metal and circuits, a reminder of battles fought long before any living human was born. Taiho's real eye opened slowly, adjusting to light he hadn't seen for centuries. His body ached in ways that would kill a normal person, but he wasn't normal. None of them were. They had been built for war, enhanced with technology that was considered too dangerous for the peaceful galaxy above. Around him, other pods were opening. Major Lee Suna sat up with fluid grace despite her age, her hands instinctively reaching for weapons that weren't there yet. 3 fingers on her left hand were mechanical replacements, souvenirs from the Battle of New Seoul, where she had held a bunker against 10,000 enemy soldiers. Captain Park Jin-ho rolled out of his pod and immediately dropped into a combat stance, his enhanced reflexes still sharp after a millennium of sleep. The scars covering his arms told stories of hand-to-hand combat with machines that had tried to tear humanity apart piece by piece. Sergeant Nam Yuna was smaller than the others, but when she opened her eyes, there was something in them that made even these hardened warriors respect her. She had earned her rank in the underground tunnels beneath Tokyo, where she had fought enemy cyborgs in darkness so complete that regular humans would have gone insane. "Arya," Taiho's voice was rough from disuse. "Status report." The facility's artificial intelligence materialized as a blue hologram, her voice gentle despite delivering harsh news. "Welcome back, Colonel. The date is March 15th, 3247. You have been in cryogenic sleep for 1,037 years. Taiho nodded slowly. They had all known this day might come. "What woke us?" "An alien threat called the Void Swarm has returned." "They are mechanical entities that consume entire star systems. The Galactic Council's combined fleets have failed to stop them. Ambassador Park has requested activation of the Eternal Guard." Lee Suna stood up, her joints popping as enhanced bones adjusted to movement. "How bad is it out there?" 17 systems have been completely consumed. Current projections show total galactic extinction within 6 months, if the swarm is not stopped. The warriors looked at each other with grim understanding. This was exactly what they had trained for, the moment when humanity's survival depended on those willing to do terrible things for the greater good. Park Jin-ho cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing through the chamber. "Sounds like Tuesday back in our day." Nam Yuna allowed herself a small, cold smile. "At least this time we're fighting machines instead of our own species." Taiho flexed his scarred hands, feeling the old familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders. These people had followed him through hell itself, and they would do it again. "Arya, how many of us made it through the long sleep?" 3,712 combat-ready units, Colonel. All enhanced personnel, all veterans of the final wars. Taiho looked around at his awakening soldiers, men and women who had chosen to sleep rather than live in a peaceful galaxy they had helped create, but could never truly be part of. "Wake them all," he commanded. "We have work to do." The ships looked like flying fortresses, all sharp angles and thick armor plating that made them seem more like hammers than vessels. While the galaxy's other races built sleek ships that glided through space like graceful birds, these human transports looked like they were built to ram through anything in their way. Every surface was covered in weapon mounts, sensor arrays, and blast shields that had seen real combat. Captain Yoon Ji-hai walked through the main cargo bay, where her soldiers were making their final preparations. Her boots made no sound on the metal deck. After 1,000 years of sleep, these warriors still moved like ghosts when they wanted to. She had learned that skill in the subway tunnels beneath ruined cities, where a single footstep could mean death. Around her, 3,000 of humanity's most dangerous people prepared for war, with the same calm focus they had shown centuries. Hago? These weren't young recruits eager for glory. They were professionals who had seen enough death to last several lifetimes, and they treated their weapons like old friends. Lieutenant Ko Sung-wan sat cross-legged on the floor, his kinetic rifle stripped down to its basic parts. His hands moved with the precision of a surgeon as he cleaned each component. This wasn't just maintenance, it was almost like a prayer ritual. The rifle had been with him through 43 major battles and countless smaller fights. He knew every scratch on its surface, every slight imperfection that might affect its performance. "Still using that old relic?" asked Corporal Han Bora as she walked past, testing the edge of her combat knife against her thumb. A single drop of blood appeared, proving the blade was sharp enough to cut through enhanced armor. "This rifle has killed more enemies than some." "Entire divisions," Ko replied without looking up. "Why would I trust anything else?" Han nodded with understanding. Her own knife had been forged from the hull of an enemy ship she had destroyed single-handedly. The metal had been folded and reforged dozens of times until it could cut through almost anything. Like Ko's rifle, it was more than just a weapon. It was a piece of history. All around them, similar scenes played out. Soldiers checked ammunition that used technology the galaxy had banned as too destructive. Others sharpened blades that would make alien diplomats faint with horror. Some meditated silently, preparing their minds for the violence they knew was coming. These warriors didn't talk much, but when they did speak, their words carried weight. They had faced the end of everything before and survived. They knew what. It meant to stand alone against impossible odds and somehow find a way to win. High above them, in the observation decks that ringed the cargo bay, representatives from the Galactic Council watched through reinforced windows. The alien diplomats had expected to see soldiers like the ones they knew, professional, disciplined, but still fundamentally civilized. Instead, they saw something that made their various species equivalent of skin crawl. These humans moved like predators. Every gesture was efficient and deadly. When they looked at their weapons, there was an intimacy there that spoke of terrible familiarity with violence. "They're like living weapons," whispered a Zephyrian observer, his crystal formations dimming with fear. "No," corrected an elderly Cantorian delegate who had studied human history. "Weapons are tools. These are something much worse. They're warriors who have learned to love war." The aliens had spent centuries thinking they understood humanity. They had seen human diplomats, traders, scientists, and artists. But they had never seen humans like these, the ones who had been locked away because they were too dangerous for a peaceful galaxy. Now, watching them prepare for battle with the casual efficiency of long practice, the Council representatives began to understand why humanity had hidden these soldiers away, and why, when extinction came calling, they had chosen to wake them up. The human fleet materialized in the Xerion system like ghosts emerging from a nightmare. Where once 3 mighty armadas had patrolled, representing the best ships from dozens of worlds, now only twisted metal and frozen corpses drifted through space. The Void Swarm had turned this place into a graveyard. Admiral Choi Hyunwoo stood on his bridge, studying the enemy through eyes that had seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations. His ship's computers offered him detailed analysis, probability, calculations, and tactical recommendations. He ignored them all. Instead, he watched the swarm vessels move through the debris field like hungry sharks, their black hulls absorbing light and hope in equal measure. "Sir," Commander Song Ji-young's voice was tight with controlled fear. "Initial scans confirm what the Council told us. These machines adapt faster than anything we've ever encountered. They've already learned to counter energy weapons, plasma cannons, and quantum torpedoes. Every tactic the galactic fleets used against them has been analyzed and defeated." Hyunwoo nodded slowly, his scarred hands clasped behind his back. Around him, his bridge crew worked with the quiet efficiency of people who had faced impossible odds before. These weren't the panicked voices he heard in Council transmissions. These were professionals who understood that fear was just another piece of information to be processed and filed away. "Show me the battle recordings," he commanded. The main screen filled with footage from the previous battles. Hyunwoo watched as beautiful alien ships fired their most advanced weapons at the swarm, only to see their attacks absorbed or deflected. He saw coordination that would make any military academy proud, formations that represented centuries of tactical evolution, strategies that had won 1,000 wars against organic enemies, and he watched it all fail. The swarm learned from every attack, adapted to every strategy, and turned the aliens' own sophistication against them. The more complex the tactic, the faster the machines found a way to counter it. It was like watching chess masters play against an opponent who rewrote the rules after every move. "They're fighting the wrong war," Hyunwoo said quietly. "Sir?" Song asked. "These machines expect intelligent opponents. They're designed to face civilized warfare, the kind we've all been practicing for the last 1,000 years. His smile was cold and sharp. "But we're not civilized, are we?" Major Kang Minho, standing at the weapons console, understood immediately. His own smile was equally dark. "No, sir, we're not. The swarm has adapted to energy weapons, so we use kinetic rounds. They've learned to counter coordinated fleet movements, so we attack in ways that make no tactical sense. They expect us to preserve our ships and minimize casualties." Hyunwoo's voice grew harder. "So we do the opposite." The Council observers, watching from their secure communications booth, looked confused and horrified. This wasn't how warfare was supposed to work. There were rules, protocols, accepted practices that had kept galactic conflicts from becoming too destructive. "Major Kang," Hyunwoo continued, "prepare all boarding parties. I want every transport loaded with assault teams carrying explosive charges and hand weapons. Sir, one of the council observers interrupted, boarding actions are considered primitive and unnecessarily dangerous. Surely your advanced weaponry. Our advanced weaponry is exactly what they're expecting. Hyun-woo cut him off. These machines have studied 1,000 years of galactic warfare. They know everything about how civilized species fight. He turned to face the observer, and something in his eyes made the alien step back. But they don't know how barbarians fight. The human ships began launching what looked like crude metal capsules, nothing like the sleek fighters or elegant missiles the aliens were used to seeing. Each pod contained a dozen warriors armed with weapons that would have been considered antiques by galactic standards. "This is madness," whispered a Zephyrian observer. "They're sending soldiers to fight inside enemy ships. That's suicide." Commander Song overheard and smiled grimly. "Sir, the aliens think we're crazy." "Good," Hyun-woo replied. "If we're lucky, the swarm will think so too, and that confusion will be the only advantage we need." The airlock exploded inward as Sergeant First Class Im Soo-young's boot connected with reinforced metal. Behind her, 11 other warriors poured into the swarm vessel like water through a broken dam. The ship's interior was a nightmare of twisted corridors and pulsing machinery, designed by minds that had never known organic life. While the galaxy's other species fought their clean, distant wars with energy beams and coordinated fleet movements, these humans brought something the machines had never encountered: raw, brutal violence delivered up close and personal. Soo-young rolled left as a mechanical claw swept through the space where her head had been. Her combat knife found the gap between armor plates, and sparks flew as she twisted the blade deeper. The machine writhed and died, its optical sensors dimming to black. "Move fast, kill faster," she barked to her squad. This wasn't the careful, methodical warfare taught in galactic military academies. This was the kind of fighting that happened in dark alleys and bombed-out buildings, where survival meant being more vicious than your enemy. Corporal Jeon Min-soo pressed himself against a bulkhead as laser fire scorched the air around him. While the swarm's weapons could adapt to energy shields and advanced armor, they hadn't been programmed to fight enemies who used the ship's own structure as cover. He pulled the pin from a shaped charge, a crude explosive that would have horrified any civilized military engineer. The blast tore through the corridor, severing power lines and command cables that the ship's builders had never thought to protect. Sparks rained down as entire sections of the vessel went dark. The swarm had learned to counter sophisticated weapons, but they were confused by explosives that worked through simple chemistry rather than advanced physics. 3 corridors away, Private Lee Sun-hee found herself alone as her squad pushed deeper into the ship. A blast door began sliding shut, threatening to trap her teammates in a section that was about to vent into space. Without thinking, she jammed her hands into the door mechanism. The enhanced bones in her arms creaked under the pressure as tons of metal tried to close. Her augmented muscles, designed for combat in Earth's most brutal wars, held the door open through sheer force of will. Behind her, she could hear her squadmates fighting their way to safety. "Go, go, go!" she shouted, blood running down her arms, where the metal edges cut into her flesh. Each second felt like an hour, as her enhanced body fought against machinery designed to withstand the vacuum of space. The last warrior made it through, just as Sun-hee's strength finally gave out. She rolled clear as the door slammed shut with a sound like thunder. Behind it, she could hear the whistle of escaping air as the damaged section emptied into space, taking a dozen swarm units with it. Throughout the ship, similar scenes played out as human warriors fought with a savagery that left their alien observers speechless. These soldiers didn't just destroy the enemy. They turned every battle into a personal contest of will and violence. The galactic species, watching from their command ships, had spent centuries refining warfare into something almost civilized. They used tactics that minimized casualties, weapons that were precise and efficient, strategies that preserved valuable resources. War, for them, had become a calculated exercise. But these ancient humans fought like their ancestors had in the caves and forests of prehistoric Earth. They used their environment as a weapon, turned the enemy's own ship against them, and treated every encounter as a fight to the death where only the most ruthless would survive. "This is impossible," whispered a Cantorian observer. watching as human soldiers literally tore apart machine opponents with their bare hands. How are they winning? The answer was simple, though the aliens couldn't understand it. The swarm had been built to fight logical opponents who followed predictable patterns, but there was nothing logical about a warrior who would hold a blast door open with her bare hands, or a soldier who would detonate explosives in a confined space just to destroy a few more enemies. These humans weren't fighting a war, they were fighting for survival, the way their species always had. Colonel Kim Tae-ho sat in the medical bay of his flagship, watching the red warning lights blink across his cybernetic display. His left eye, the mechanical one that had served him faithfully for over 3 centuries, was losing focus. Static crawled across his vision like digital snow, and sometimes the display went completely black for several seconds at a time. Around him, the ship's medical bay looked more like a morgue than a healing center. Rows of beds held warriors who had survived battles that would have destroyed entire armies, only to be defeated by time itself. Their enhanced bodies, pushed beyond all human limits and then frozen for 1,000 years, were finally giving up. "Sir," the medical officer's voice was gentle but honest, "we're losing people faster than the swarm is killing them." Tae-ho nodded slowly, feeling the artificial joints in his neck grinding against each other. Half of his 3,000 warriors were already dead. Some had fallen in battle, torn apart by machine claws or vaporized by energy weapons. But most had simply collapsed as their cybernetic parts failed, their enhanced organs shut down, or their augmented bones cracked under stress they had carried for too long. Major Lee Suna entered the medical bay, her left arm hanging useless at her side. The neural interface that controlled her prosthetic hand had burned out during the last battle, leaving her with dead weight attached to her shoulder. But she still carried herself like the warrior she had always been, her remaining. "Hand steady," as she saluted. "Casualty report, sir," she said, handing him a data pad with her good hand. "We lost another 100 during the night. Not from combat, their systems just stopped." Tae-ho scanned the numbers with his failing eye. Names he had known for centuries, warriors who had followed him through hell itself, now reduced to statistics on a medical report. Each name represented someone who had chosen to sleep rather than live in a peaceful galaxy they had helped create, but could never truly be part of. "Medical estimates?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Days at most, maybe hours for some of us. The 1,000-year sleep damaged our systems more than we thought. Every augmentation, every enhancement, every piece of technology that made us more than human is breaking down at the same time." Through the medical bay's windows, Tae-ho could see his remaining warriors preparing for what everyone knew would be their final battles. Captain Baek Dong-ho was teaching younger soldiers how to manually detonate explosives when their electronic timers failed. His own cybernetic legs were locked in position. He couldn't bend his knees anymore, but he could still stand and fight. Lieutenant Ryu Yunbi sat cross-legged on the deck, her enhanced spine visible through the gap in her damaged armor. She was meditating, preparing her mind for what was coming. Her vital signs showed that her artificial heart was running at only 60% capacity, but her eyes were calm and focused. These warriors had always known this day would come. They hadn't volunteered for the long sleep because they wanted to see the future. They had volunteered because they knew that someday humanity might need soldiers who were willing to pay any price to protect what they loved. "The irony," Suna said quietly, "is that we're finally dying of old age." Tae-ho almost smiled at that. They had survived wars that had nearly ended their species, battles against machines and aliens and their own kind. They had been shot, stabbed, burnt and broken more times than they could count. But in the end, time itself was the enemy they couldn't defeat. "How many are still combat-ready?" he asked. "Maybe 800. And that number drops every hour." Tae-ho stood up, his artificial joints protesting with mechanical whines and clicks. Around him, his dying warriors continued their preparations with the same calm professionalism they had shown for centuries. They weren't afraid of death. They had made peace with that long ago. They were only afraid of dying before their job was finished. "Then we better make those 800 count," he said. "Signal all units. Final assault begins in 6 hours." The Void Swarm had finally learned to fear. For the first time in their mechanical existence, the ancient machines recognized a threat that couldn't be calculated or predicted. Their command vessels, massive constructs the size of cities, began moving toward the human fleet with purpose that went beyond simple conquest. This was personal now. Admiral Choi Hyun-woo stood in his war room, looking at faces he had known for lifetimes. These weren't the thousands of warriors who had awakened from their long sleep. Disease, battle, and the simple failure of their enhanced bodies had reduced his force to barely 300 soldiers. But these 300 were the toughest of the tough, the ones whose cybernetic hearts kept beating when others had failed, whose augmented bones held together when others had cracked. Major Park Jae-won leaned heavily on the tactical table, his prosthetic leg sparking with each movement. Half his face was covered by a medical patch where his cybernetic eye had burned out, but his remaining eye burned with determination. "Sir, long-range sensors show at least 50 command vessels heading our way. They're bringing everything they have." Captain Osilgi nodded grimly, her enhanced arm hanging useless at her side. "Good. Means we hurt them bad enough to get their attention." Despite her injuries, she still moved with the deadly grace that had made her legend in the tunnel wars beneath Old Seoul. Commander Yang Taemin was perhaps in the worst shape of all. His entire left side was a patchwork of emergency repairs and medical tape, but he had refused to be taken off duty. "What's the plan, Admiral? Same as always. Hit them where it hurts and make them pay for every inch?" Hyun-woo looked around the room at these warriors who had followed him through decades of impossible battles. In their faces, he saw the same quiet acceptance that had carried them through the darkest moments of humanity's history. They knew what was coming, and they were ready. "This time it's different," he said quietly. "We're carrying planet killers, weapons powerful enough to crack worlds in half, but they need to be detonated manually from inside the target." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. These weren't missiles they could fire from a safe distance. Someone would have to carry these weapons into the heart of the enemy formation and set them off by hand, knowing they would never escape the blast. Sergeant Kim Hye-jin, who had been quietly checking her rifle in the corner, looked up with a small smile. "Like the old days, sir. Someone has to stand against the dark." Her weapon was held together with metal tape and spare parts, but it still fired true. That was all that mattered. One by one, the other warriors nodded their agreement. They had always known this moment would come, the time when standing against the darkness would require the ultimate sacrifice. "I remember," said Major Park, his voice distant with memory. "The sky above Busan was so blue the day the war ended. You could see clouds shaped like dragons. The cherry blossoms in Kyoto," added Captain O. "They bloomed even while the city burned around them. Most beautiful thing I ever saw." Commander Yang smiled despite his pain. "My grandmother's rice cakes. She made them every New Year until the machines came, said they brought good luck." These warriors, who had spent lifetimes dealing death and destruction, found comfort in memories of beauty and peace. They spoke of Earth not as the war-torn world they had left behind, but as the home they had fought to preserve. Blue skies, flowering trees, the smell of home cooking, simple things that made life worth protecting. "We'll never see any of it again," Hyun-woo said simply, "but our children's children will. That's worth something." As they prepared for their final mission, these ancient warriors felt something they hadn't experienced in centuries: peace. Not the peace of victory or the end of battle, but the deep calm that comes from knowing your purpose and accepting it completely. They had awakened not to live, but to die, and they were ready. The final battle began not with fanfare or speeches, but with the quiet hum of 300 warriors checking their weapons one last time. Across 3-star systems, human ships dove toward swarm command vessels, like meteors falling from heaven, each one carrying death in the form of planet-killer warheads that required a human hand to activate. Major Lim Wonho's fighter was already falling apart around him as he aimed for the bridge of the largest swarm vessel. His left engine was dead. His right wing was gone, and his cockpit was filling with smoke from burning electronics. But his targeting system still worked, and that was all he needed. "Control, this is Wonho," he said into his radio, knowing no one could hear him anymore. "Tell my wife I remembered her smile at the end." His fighter punched through the command ship's armor like a bullet through paper. The explosion that followed lit up half the star system, turning a vessel the size of a city into expanding gas and metal fragments. Wonho never felt the impact. He was already gone, flying his broken ship into eternity with a smile on his face. 3 systems away, Captain An Yejin found herself alone in a reactor room the size of a cathedral, surrounded by mechanical nightmares. That had once been beautiful in their alien design. Now they were just obstacles between her and the planet-killer device she needed to arm. Her left arm was gone, torn away by claws that moved faster than human eyes could follow. Her right leg was broken in 3 places, held together by combat tape and willpower, but her remaining hand was steady as she worked on the device's controls, even as the machines closed in around her. "You want to know what makes humans different?" she asked the approaching swarm units, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "We don't quit, ever." The explosion that consumed the reactor room was visible from 3 planets away, a new sun born from human determination and alien technology meeting in violent harmony. Lieutenant Shin Juho had always preferred close combat to long-range fighting. Even now, deep in the corridors of the swarm flagship, he fought with the ancient weapons his ancestors had carried, a blade forged from earth steel and sharpened by centuries of conflict. His opponents were machines built for war, with claws, like razors and armor that could stop energy weapons. But they had never faced a warrior who knew exactly where to strike, who could find the gaps in their protection that their builders never thought to guard. His combat knife slid between armor plates with surgical precision, finding the cables and circuits that kept these nightmares moving. Around him, mechanical bodies fell like wheat before a scythe, their optical sensors dimming as his blade found their electronic hearts. "For Earth," he whispered, as he reached the ship's core, where Corporal Park Mirai was working frantically to override the safety protocols on their planet-killer warhead. Her hands moved across controls that were never meant for human operation, forcing alien technology to accept human commands through pure determination. "Almost got it," she said, sweat running down her face as alarms screamed around them. 30 seconds. Juho nodded and turned to face the corridor as more swarm units poured toward them. His blade was chipped now, his armor was cracking, but he stood firm. 30 seconds might as well have been 30 years. He would hold this. Positioned for as long as his heart kept beating, the machines came at him in waves, but he met them with steel and fury. Each strike was precise, economical, deadly. He had learned to fight in the ruins of old Earth, where wasting motion meant death, and that training served him well now. When the warhead finally detonated, it took Juho and Mirai with it, along with the entire swarm flagship and everything within 1,000,000 kilometers. But they died knowing their sacrifice had meaning. Another piece of the enemy fleet was gone, turned to vapor and memory. Across the 3 star systems, similar scenes played out as the last warriors of Earth completed their final missions. Each explosion was like a newborn star, brief and brilliant and devastating. And with each detonation, the galaxy became a little safer, bought with the blood of soldiers who had never expected to see peace, only to die protecting it. The silence was deafening. For the first time in months, the emergency communications channels of the Galactic Council carried no desperate pleas for help, no reports of worlds being consumed, no panic-stricken voices begging for rescue. The Void Swarm, ancient destroyers that had awakened to devour the galaxy, now drifted through space as lifeless metal debris. Ambassador Minji Park stood alone in the memorial chamber aboard the Council's flagship, staring at a wall of screens that had gone dark one by one. Each screen had shown the final moments of a human warrior, men and women who had carried planet-killer weapons into the heart of enemy vessels, knowing they would never return. Final transmission from Sector 7, the communications officer had announced an hour ago. Signal lost. Those 3 words meant that Sergeant Kim Hee-jin had completed her mission, dying in a blast that could be seen from neighboring star systems. Now, all the screens were dark. 3,000 warriors had awakened from their 1,000-year sleep, and not one of them remained alive. They had succeeded in their mission with the kind of thoroughness that only comes from absolute commitment to a cause greater than personal survival. Earth received the news with a mixture of pride and grief that surprised even its own people. These ancient warriors had been locked away because they were too dangerous for a peaceful society. Most modern humans had never even known they existed. But now, as the reports came in of their sacrifice, something stirred in the human heart that had been sleeping for centuries. In Seoul, crowds gathered in the old military districts where monuments to forgotten wars stood covered in dust. People brought flowers and small offerings, leaving them at memorials for soldiers whose names they didn't know but whose sacrifice they understood. Children asked their parents who these warriors were, and the adults struggled to explain how heroes and monsters could sometimes be the same people. On other worlds throughout the galaxy, alien species tried to process what they had witnessed. The humans they knew were diplomats, traders, artists, and scientists. They were reasonable people who solved problems through negotiation and compromise. They built beautiful cities and created stunning art. They were, by galactic standards, civilized, but the warriors who had just died saving the galaxy were something else entirely. They fought with a savagery that made most alien species uncomfortable to even think about. They used weapons that were banned by every civilized treaty, employed tactics that violated the accepted rules of warfare, and showed a willingness to die that went beyond professional duty into something almost religious. The Cantorian delegate who had watched the final battles from the safety of the command ship couldn't sleep for days afterward. They fought like they enjoyed it, he kept telling anyone who would listen. Not the dying part, but the fighting itself, as if violence was as natural to them as breathing. A Zephyrian philosopher spent weeks analyzing the recordings of human combat techniques, trying to understand how a species could be both gentle enough to write poetry and savage enough to tear apart mechanical nightmares with their bare hands. Her conclusion, published in academic journals across the galaxy, was simple and terrifying. Humans are capable of becoming whatever they need to become to survive. The Galactic Council voted unanimously to erect monuments to the fallen warriors, but the debates about what those monuments should say lasted for months. How do you honor soldiers who saved civilization by embracing the very barbarism that civilization was supposed to eliminate? In the end, they settled on simple words carved in stone that would last for millennia. They were the storm before the calm, the darkness that held back a greater night. We remember them not as heroes, but as what heroes aspire to become. Monuments were placed not in the centers of great cities, but on the edges of inhabited space, where travelers would see them as they journeyed between the stars. Each monument carried the same message in 100 different languages, and at the bottom, always in human script, were the names of every warrior who had died in the final battle. But perhaps the most important memorial was kept in the deepest vaults of the galactic archives, where future generations would find the complete records of humanity's ancient warriors. The files contained detailed analysis of their tactics, their weapons, their culture, and their philosophy of warfare. At the end of those files, written by human hands before the final battle, were the words that would define their legacy. We sleep so that you may dream of peace. We die so that you may live in light. Remember us not as we were, but as what you may need to become. The old warriors were gone, but their thunder would echo through eternity, a reminder that sometimes the price of civilization is having those willing to become uncivilized to protect it.